Alright, so today I'd like to talk about kind of like how temporary everything is and how it's best just to make choices that make the most of where you are right now. And what brought this up is a few days ago I saw some videos of Ronnie Coleman working out at 52, and it's not the first time I've seen this. I've seen a lot of things like this in the past. Like, I subscribe to a magazine called Iron Mind, which is kind of like an intelligent approach to strength training, and they have like a lot of high quality products and whatnot. But anyway, when you read that magazine, sometimes they'll like show famous people where they're at now or something. And so like once they showed a picture of Pat Casey, and I don't remember if it was the 50s or the 60s, but he was like one of the first really famous American powerlifters and like the first guy to break the 600-pound bench barrier in competition officially. So he's kind of a legend, and he was a very large man. He was like 6'3", and he was either in the high 200s or low 300s. He was a enormous, very strong man. And in this picture, like a lot of people that get older, he had gotten really thin and lean, and he did this for health reasons. A lot of strength guys, like later down the road when they're getting older, their body can't do the same stuff it used to be. They'll lose a ton of weight and they'll just start focusing on health and longevity. And it just looks so weird to see like a legend or a freakishly huge icon just look so ordinary. Like, you're like, whoa, he doesn't even look like the same guy. And then I don't know how many of you have paid attention to like World's Strongest Man competitions or watched movies that aren't quite as common or watched some old school wrestling. But back in like 1982 or 1981, there was this big, huge, strong guy from Canada named Tom McGee. He's like 6'4.5", 275, which may not sound that big, but he was really, really lean. So it's like almost 100% muscle. He's like really, really cut, but he was still 275, and he's really strong and really fast. He got like second in either 81 or 82, and I think he got second to someone really good like John Paul Sigersham, who is like a legend. So anyway, he was crazy strong. He could like bench press over 550 and squat and deadlift over 800 pounds. He was like legit world-class strong. And like, he did a little stint in the WWF back in the day. They called him Mega Man or something. And then he played a part in an old, what was that? The crazy guy from the NFL back in the day that did some movies. Gosh darn, my memory's not working, but he did a movie called Stone Cold, and this guy, Tom McGee, played this pit fighter in it that he ended up beating up. But he's another one of those guys where he was like just massive and gigantic and super strong, and then like you see him like 20 years down the road or something, and he did the same thing as Pat Casey, where he had purposely lost a lot of weight and started focusing on health. So he was just this thin, lean, healthy guy doing the best he could to make the most of where he was at that point in his journey. And it's just weird seeing that. And so anyway, like, that was provoked again by seeing Ronnie Coleman, because I'm sure he's recent enough that most people in the strength world are aware of who he was. He's 8-time Mr. Olympia. He was like 300 pounds and crazy strong. He could like bench over 500 and squat and deadlift over 800. And so it's one of the strongest bodybuilders ever. And he was just crazy nuts massive. He had like 24-inch arms and all kinds of silly stuff. But now he's like in his 50s, and I mean, even when he was in his 40s, he was gigantic. Like, he was still winning Mr. Olympias. He was still doing crazy stuff. But time finally caught up with him, and you know, it's craziness. You see someone that was like a legend and superhuman, and then you see like where they are now, and he's still got that same warrior spirit, and he's still doing his best. But you are where you are. I remember reading the book about the famous strongman of history, Louis Cyr from Canada. He was so crazy strong. He was a big, massive guy, and you read the book and he does so many awesome things. Like, he did one of the coolest things ever in strongman history. Like, there were a lot of guys in Europe back then that like would say they were the strongest man in the world, and they would get one specialty lift and they'd just train it and train it and train it, and they'd be like the master of that lift. They could do it better than anyone, and that'd be like their challenge lift in their thing, so that they could prove like anyone from the audience could come up and challenge them. And since they were a super strong person to start with, that's why they chose this path. And then the fact that they put all that time and effort into this one lift, no one could ever beat them at that lift, and so they could like keep their claim as the strongest man. Well, this big Louis guy from Canada, he made a name in America, and then he went overseas to Europe, and when he was doing his contest, everyone's jaws started dropping because they started to realize what he was doing. He was taking every single famous strongman in Europe's mastery lift and one up in it. Like, every one, like right in a row, he'd like do better than this guy's best lift and then go do better than this guy's lift, and it was one of the coolest things in strongman history. But then towards the end of the book, he's an old man. Like, he's not a young, super powerful legend anymore, and he's been undefeated all these years, and this new young strong guy is coming up and competing against him, and you see him struggling and failing at weights that were half as heavy as he used to do back when he was in his peak. And even though that happened, they either tied or the young guy barely beat him, but he hands down tipped his hat to him and proclaimed, "This is now the strongest man in the world," and retired after that. But it's just the way of time. It catches up with everyone. And so I just brought this up as, no matter where you are, like, just make the best of where you're at. Like, make choices that make sense. Like Tom McGee and Pat Casey deciding that it's time to start getting lean and focusing on health. That was a good decision, because that was what was best for them at that point in their journey. So just keep your options open, and just be happy to make the most of the potential you have at that moment. And that should greatly improve your lot in life.